Welcome, everyone. On behalf of Parity, I am so glad that you're here for this special event. My name is Marian Edmonds Allen, and I'm the Executive Director of Parity. And I am just so excited about the people that you see before you right now. Kimberly Anderson is a longtime friend of mine. She's a board member of Parity, and she is someone who Kimberly, you've reinvented yourself in ways that I I am excited about because you saw a need in the world and you went for it. You went and you got education, you did all the work to be where you are now, an expert in the field and working every day to save lives. And I am grateful and humbled that you've done that. And Dr. Molano, my friend Freddy, you inspire me for so many reasons. Not just your wonderful cats that I see on social media. The career that you have had over the years, the things that you have done, that you have started, and the things that you continue to do every day. You're not the type of person that will toot your own horn. I think so many people have no idea of all the things that you do. And I am humbled by your personal service in the world to save lives. And I am honored to call you my friend. The other person we will hear from is Nishka Seth, and you will hear from her later. Nishka is a younger person who is a go-getter. She's a double major in mental health and master of public health, and she's made it her mission to do all that she can to help LGBT folks in the world with health and mental health. And you'll see she is a real go-getter. She also works full-time as a victim advocate. So she is something else. So we have an incredible program today. Kimberly, I'm so excited to learn from you. Dr. Molano, I'm so excited to learn from you. Kimberly, take it away.
Thank you, Marian. What a glowing introduction. One of the reasons I've been able to introduce or reinvent myself is largely due to you, Marian. So thank you. I appreciate your friendship and your mentorship. And Dr. Molano, we got to know each other a little over a year ago in New York at a Parity function. And then I think I at least had an intention and some energy to start doing some work with you in New York City. And then the world changed and things kind of shut down. So I'm excited to be able to hear from you today. I think what I'll do before I introduce myself, I would like to just build off of what Marian said in terms of Nishka Seth. I asked her to prepare a short presentation. And so she recorded a little video that I'd like to share. And then after Nishka, I'd like to share, or I'd like to let Dr. Molano share some thoughts that you and I had a conversation the other day that I thought this is exactly what we need to be hearing during our presentation. So then I'll pitch it to you after Nishka, and then I'll bring it back and I'll jump into my thing. We will more than likely go all the way to 2 o'clock. If the participants, if you need to come and go, we all have lives. I totally understand that. Okay, here we go with Nishka.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nishka Seth, and I am currently so many things, so many labels, but what might be an easier way to describe me is a junior at Drexel University, majoring in psychology with 2 minors. One is public health and the other is health services administration. And my pronouns are she and her. I'm so glad that this workshop is happening. Right now, I'm actually working as a victim advocate at CARI, a senior advocacy organization in Philadelphia, so I am sorry I couldn't be here to grow and learn right next to you all. With that said, the topic of suicidal ideation, suicide awareness, and other related topics are often considered taboo. Let's change that together. Although some might believe me to be young, I not only have experienced suicidal ideation, but I've worked with some who battle with these thoughts. My first personal experience was when I was 7, and I was only given access to help when I was 12. That is a long gap, and many people may not be able to wait as long or may even have to wait longer for resources such as antidepressants, therapy, whether it is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, often used for those who battle with PTSD, like me. With my work experience, I volunteered at the helpline at my school, Drexel University again. And while some calls were simple, others were a little more intense, which needed to be handled with great caution and care. According to the AAU, you might probably already know this statistic, but 1 in 5 college students battle with suicidal ideation. And of course, what do we see with these numbers? Particularly higher rates in the LGBTQ community. Trans students and bisexual students specifically, according to that Harvard University by AAU, were reporting higher frequencies of suicidal ideation and self-harm along with attempting suicide. This year, I completed a health briefing on this very topic. More specifically, if you want to know, the title of this very, very long topic was Suicidal Ideation Due to Depression Who Face In-Person Bullying Within LGBTQ Youth in Urban High Schools in the US. A mouthful, right? Well, I came up with a couple policy alternatives. And one is that there should be an implementation of safe spaces such as GSA, Gay Straight Alliance, to allow those who are impacted by bullying in the LGBTQ community to confide in. My second policy alternative was training staff members such as guidance counselors, teachers, and providing knowledge about different sexualities and how to manage situations, while also testing their ability to help LGBTQ students facing bullying with monthly check-ins. And of course, last, create a new sexual education curriculum that is inclusive of all sexual identities, that is mandatory for high school youth to participate in. The last part hits very, very much close to home, and I'm working on it personally, as I've written an LGBTQ plus children's book called Jasper Goes to the Ballet, which goes through the ABCs of the LGBTQ community. I've been going through each county and each elementary school within the state of Pennsylvania during my lunch break and contacting them to see if they would like the free PDF copy and if I could be of literally any assistance, knowing very well schools are completely underfunded. Many teachers wrote back to me saying that they needed assistance with their curriculum, or simply stated that they'd like a copy because they had a GSA already established. This made me completely elated. I was so happy to hear this. And if you wonder why I am specifically reaching out to Pennsylvania teachers, it's because of the limited LGBTQ education within the state. And because I now call Pennsylvania home. I was in Jersey for 19 years, and I just recently moved right before the pandemic, and I want to make a change wherever I go. And I've also been working on 2 different research projects. As a research assistant at the Drexel Eating Disorder Lab, I'm conducting a correlation between how trauma can possibly impact emotional eating habits or dissociation. We can already see that there is a huge positive correlation, meaning that trauma can in fact lead to problematic eating behaviors, such as dissociative eating. Further, I'm working with the Intergalactic Pride Center to send out surveys in the queer community to see if they would be in need of any peer support or assistance. This intervention is absolutely necessary in my opinion. Making sure people know that there is help and that they aren't alone is my very first priority in the world. And conducting this research is making that goal possible. Now, having the research and the work experience has shown me that there is still miles to go. I really mean that. Such a long way to go. But I learned that we do need to come together and not only help our communities, but support them. And that's exactly what we're doing here today. And I'm very proud of all of us that attended, and I'm proud of the work that we're about to do. Don't hesitate to contact me. My information will be provided soon. All right. Have a good workshop.
Thank you, Nishka. You can see that she is just amazing and a go-getter. And I watched that video and I'm like, I want a copy of that PDF file of that book. So I'm just thrilled that she is associated with Parity at all, and that we somehow, Marion, you found her, this little diamond, this gold nugget rolling around in New Jersey and Pennsylvania doing this amazing work. So thank you, Nishka. I love that she's tackling disordered eating and eating disorders and binging as a result of trauma. The trauma-informed lens with eating disorders is very, very important. And you'll hear me talk about that later as well. So thank you, Nishka. I can't wait to do, something's going to happen where we get to work together. I'm going to turn the time over to Dr. Molano for, I said 10 minutes, but if you want to take more, Freddy, go for it. Just the mic and the floor is yours. Share with us what you're doing and how you're changing the world from there.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say thank you to the Reverend Edmund and to Kimberly for inviting me to be part of this workshop session. I think it's a very important. I was lucky that I met you guys like this in a year ago. And sometimes I feel that God put people together. You don't know why or how, but when you get together, you just have to keep going and you have a better team. I work for Community Healthcare Network for 30 years, and I've been blessed to start what we call our transgender family program for the last 14 years, with the principle that we all have a family and we all need a family. That family, whether it is adopted, designed, biological, we need that family. And you get better support and better clinical outcomes. When I first was invited, I heard the invitation about this. Of course, I did my reading and I went to the clinical journals and I went to the literature. And I really read a lot of it. However, there was a moment that I decided that I cannot do that, why to go into journals when I see our transgender women and brothers around the program, around the clinic, and we are working with them. I think that is, I like to learn more from the personal experiences for what we see day to day. And living through this pandemic, it had brought a very difficult perspective to look at, but we need to do it for the members of our trans community in New York City. I'm going to start with a story because I always believe that it's good to put a face with it. I had this patient who came from Ecuador, middle 20s, and he came to the clinic, one of our centers. He observed that we were having the group for our support group. And after a while, some hesitation, he approached me and he asked me if he can sit in the group. Of course, he sit down in the group. Then he came back, and by the third time, he felt comfortable enough to want to share some of the experience. We didn't ask him anything. We didn't ask him why he was there, but it was fair. So on that second or third time, accidentally, he called his wife in Ecuador. Not he wanted, but he sat on the phone and the wife was listening to what he was saying. He always wanted to be a woman. He always wanted to do the change. He will never be able to do it in Ecuador. One of the reasons that he came to New York, Catholic family, everything, all the reasons of not to do, even thinking about it. Right after the session, at one point he ran out of the group, which was very abrupt. And we follow up. We decided that it was better for us to follow up with him no return call when we tried to his number. But then one of the workers went to his house and he has taken every single pill that he had found in the house. He tried to take his life. Fortunately, we were on time. We called 911 and the person is still in New York. Obviously, his married life ended. And now he's still in the process of making that transition. So that was only at the beginning. And that makes me realize, and I spoke this with Kimberly last week, about that as a gay Latino man who grew up in a Protestant church with all those values, I have to come out. It was painful for my mom, for my dad, for my brothers and sisters. Some of them decided not to talk to me. I think that the hardest to take it was my dad. But as hard as it was, after a while, I came out and I still out, and I am a gay man. So end of the story from that point, and from that point on, I live my life as a Latino gay man. For a personal trans experience, this year I was talking to somebody and I realized that a personal trans experience really is really coming out every single day of their life. And while I was talking with Kimberly, she said something that is very true. Sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times in a day. Coming out is very difficult. And all of that, I mentioned this because all of that are reasons on why people want to take their lives. At one point, you get the frustration, you get tired, and all those little things that we have for granted, even in the LGBT community, they don't exist in real life for people of trans experience. All those little things that we believe that are microaggressions, and sometimes we are oversensitive, they become macroaggressions in a minute by minute by minute to the trans community. I have a friend that was telling me about coming from the Bronx, having to get up early. For those who are lucky enough to have a reason to get up early and a place to go, whether it's school, work, or whatever. Walking from the houses to the train, being called names, being laughed at by the same people every day, by the bullies that are in the streets. Go on the train or on the bus, being looked down from everyone. And that's every single day, day after day, hour after hour. Going to school when in a group that you don't belong, because everyone makes sure that they let you know that you're strange, that you're it. Never mind if you have to use a public bathroom. We have laws that protect you from using any bathroom as long as it's in use for the intention of it. However, go tell that to the manager in Macy's or any store that you have to go and use the bathroom that you believe that is the right bathroom for you. You'll be called under the police. Again, little things that we take for granted are dealt with and coming up every single day. Do you get depressed? Of course. Do you feel tired? Yes. Do you feel that you can go on? Sometimes you just want to give it up and move on. We had been, one of the things that I always try to discuss with people, we are very much into accepting, not really, and sometimes we question the accepting. Tolerance is one thing, and we get tolerated. Before I said that the gay men were tolerated. No, we have nothing like that. Many people today, they tolerate people of trans experience. Do they accept them? No. It's tolerance versus acceptance. That's something that, of course, is going to put me in the depressive mood. Acceptance without question is preventing suicide. Finding proper medical care. When the nurse, when the front desk, when the lab technician is going to look at me without giving me the second look, going to say, that person is back in here. And I'm going to tell you that even in our agency, when we work so hard on the trauma and all the things that you want to call that could cause suicide, there is someone who's going to do that look, who's going to misgender you, who's going to be nasty. And people of trans experience, they don't have to accept it. But there is no choice if we want to good services. So proper care is suicide prevention. Hormones. Why do I get my hormones? Do I get it on the street or do I get them by my provider? If I get them from a medical provider, who's going to pay for them? Even if I have insurance, I have to get a co-payment. So I had a patient who was 58 years of age, and she came to the mall. She's a trans experience sex provider. It was 1:30 when we gave him the results, and it was positive. I remember saying to somebody in the mall, I think that I had it today because I'm seeing double. And then I look at the slide from the test, and the person said, no, Dr. Molano, it's a positive result. So I asked the lady, what are you going to do now? I was thinking about how can I get in contact, like a plan, support. And she said, well, I still need to get $200. So I'm going to need to have 4 to 6 clients. So I have to pay my rent tomorrow. I said, wow. So again, medical care, how long that person can continue to do that? Food security during this pandemic, I don't think there is any more affected group than the people of trans experience. And we have tons of lines and programs in the city for people with food, assistance with food. However, who has the literacy level to go through 3, 4 different Zoom links and then go and stand on the line for 1 or 2 hours when people are looking at you in all the different ways, but in a positive way? Never. That's only one component. How do I get there if I don't have a Metro car? Or I don't have money to buy a Metro car? When we were delivering the food, I literally saw, and the people who went with me, we saw the face of COVID in many people of trans experience. That's a face that I'll never forget because it really indicated the loneliness. And I'm surprised, nicely surprised in a way, that not more have committed suicide because these people have nothing. The housing security went away with COVID. We have some shelters. We had the YMCA that they closed because they didn't want those people in there anymore. Some people, they just travel with one another. They're very supportive of each other. Like, God, do they need a place to stay? The only way that they can have is using the transactional survival sex. And it is what it is. It's a way of survival because the hormones, now I see an increase of street-bought hormones that when they see the levels that are up the roof because it's the only way. And we know that for a trans female, they have, a trans woman, they have to get the hormones on a regular basis. So again, the lack of family. And I'm going to mention also the concept that we still have today, even within the medical community. The transgender affirming surgery is wrong. It's not affirming. It's just gaining back the gender that they are, that they feel that they live with. So we have to educate the trans community. We have to educate the providers. And we have to connect, respond, empower, and accept the person the way that we are. None of us would like to be changed by anyone. But unfortunately, the trans community is subject to all of those coming every single day. That could be a good way for suicidal ideation. We have to accept people without questioning. That's suicide prevention. Accepting versus tolerance. That's prevention. That's what we need to do. The transgender individuals have a much more difficult time finding a seat at the table. And this is important to me because as a member of the LGBT community, we always go and always fight to have a seat at the table. We always say, I want my seat at the table. I want to be in the decision making. How many times do we have people of trans experience at that table? We not even think about when we making the table. We don't invite them. And when they come to the table, they have to bring their own chair, their own plate, and still we don't give them a voice. Do I get the press for that? Absolutely. Do I feel like killing myself because even when I make it to the table, I don't have a place? Absolutely. And we are responsible in the LGBT community because we're thinking about the lesbian, the gay, and the bisexual, but the T is kind of silent all the time. For the most part, have been silent all their life. And I think that it's a time and organizations that need to take the leadership of making sure that they're not only at the table, but that we are offering a safe space, because a safe space for the trans community is suicidal prevention. We've been talking about support, caring, safety. We know, and I never like to talk about the numbers because you go to one study and the numbers tell you one thing, but we do know now that the people who are living with HIV within the trans community is 25 to 30%, and that's across the country. Suicide is around 40%. And so we need to look at those things because embrace the people, we need to do something better than we're doing. Again, things that we can do to do suicide prevention, think about house and food security, access to proper medical care, acceptance and having a safe space at the table. Things that we don't do well is providing a lack of security and belonging, because again, our sisters of trans experience, they don't feel they belong to school, church, that they can go to the employment rates because I have to sell my trans card first, and maybe I get hired because somebody wants to check that box that we are inclusive, but we don't have the real mind to provide the same rights that we get, that everyone gets. And that's wrong because we need to do better than that. Support for support in personal and professional lives. Let's find time in whatever we do day after day. What are we doing to prevent suicidal ideation? Little things that are meaningless to us are very critical to our sisters and brothers of trans experience. Let's not have things for granted. We need to make sure that every time that we go to the doctor, that we go to that we move into a new apartment, we need to consider what happened to the transgender experience individual. That's something that we don't think about it, and it's not in the equation. And I think that if we start thinking today, those little things, every action that we do and provide, every service that we want to share, are we being transgender sensitive? Are we keeping them in mind? Or we just doing to check the box because it will bring me funding? And are we really looking in the outcome? how their lives are better today. What is the progress that we have made? And we have to have people accountable. Go to the funders and say, hey, we are supposed to provide this care, but you put in me these roadblocks. How can we fix it? So basically, those my words. I want to finish thing because I saw something that in Facebook from my friend George that he put something this week, which really got my attention. And he said, God is not a boy's name. We all, I'm talking this with Kimberly. We always assume that God is this white guy with long hair in white robes, and he's a male. And that has been what we taught from the beginning. Well, we need to start thinking about that that's not reality. That's not the reality for our transgender friends. We need to provide them with some more comfort. We have to be more inviting so they can join us in the church. They can join us in the place of work. They can join us in the school rooms, and they can be with us every day. They are part of us, and they are not going to go away. And that's the mission that everyone attending this meeting today should keep in mind, disseminate, and try to keep alive. Thank you.
Can you see why I just love him to death? Thank you so much. The passion, the dedication, the resilience that you're showing for members of community that you're kind of an outsider in the trans community, and yet you are that ultimate servant for them and for me. I thank you. I'm in little old Podunk, Utah, and you're in the middle of Queens, Bronx, Brooklyn.
Manhattan.
Manhattan. You're doing the work there that I can only dream of. Maybe one day I'll have the pleasure of joining you there and helping out.
It will be our pleasure to have you back.
Thank you. I like the idea of replacing the microaggressions that a trans person might have every day with the micro affirmation or a major something other than a microaggression. Thank you for speaking to all that, Dr. Molano. What a beautiful, beautiful soul. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. So we're 30 minutes in. I promised you guys 2 hours. We might go a little over. Extra credit if you stay after class. But I'll aim for 2 hours, and that's 2:00 my time. My background, I'm a transgender woman. I transitioned kind of officially, whatever that means, about 5 or 6 years ago. Usually a transition for a trans person is kind of a slow burn, and mine has taken a little bit of time. And Freddy, are we seeing you or are we seeing me? I want to see me. I don't want to see you anymore.
Okay,
I'm just kidding. No, I don't want you to leave because if there are things that you want to chime in, and I want you to be able to do that.
Okay.
And Marian as well. Anyway, I'm a trans woman. My very quick introduction before I jump in, and I have some introduction stuff for me there in my slideshow. I'm a trans woman. I was a commercial photographer in Utah, all over the world for 25, 30 years. I got a Master of Fine Arts degree from Utah State and started teaching at the university level here in Utah for about 10 years, and then moved to California to the Bay Area and enrolled at the University of San Francisco to become a marriage and family therapist. In that time, that's 30 years of time, I was married to a woman for 20 years and raised 2 beautiful children, and they are in their 20s, jumping off and doing their thing. And they are my 2 proudest accomplishments in my entire life. Currently, my office right now today is in the Rebirth Health Center. It is a transgender, gender non-binary women's health clinic here in Salt Lake City under the clinical direction of Dr. Rix DeLucanar. And she has been working with the trans community in Salt Lake City for the past 15 years. I'm practicing as a marriage and family therapist intern in the state of Utah right now under the direction of my supervisor is Dr. Lisa Tensmeyer Hansen. She is the clinical director for Flourish Therapy. And so Flourish and Rebirth agreed to let me come in here and work with the trans population that Dr. Rick Lucanar has established herself within very, very well in a very beautiful, healthy manner. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. If this doesn't work, will somebody please text me or share me? Or, oh, Marion, I just found the place where it says share computer sound. Look at that. We'll know that for next time. We were doing bug checking before. Here's a little bit about me. I'm a marriage and family therapist in California, associate marriage and family therapist practicing for the past year, a Bachelor of Arts from Utah State, Master of Fine Arts from Utah State, and a Master of Arts from University of San Francisco. This is the Golden Gate Bridge in the background with the crisis counseling telephones that are every 100 yards or so as you cross the bridge. Some disclosure, this kind of, oh, this is a little old, actually. This is from when I was in California. I need to redo this slide. So I'm an intern currently with Flourish Therapy. In the past in California, I was serving as a primary therapist and on-call therapist for Center for Discovery, Granite Bay and Menlo Park in California. Also as the on-call therapist for the Discovery Mood and Anxiety Program in Brentwood and Granite Bay, California. And also had a wonderful, about a 2.5-year experience working with the Two-Spirit population in Sacramento with the Sacramento Native American Health Center. And I've learned much about my clinical framework regarding suicide from them. This early section of the presentation will be dealing with intersectionalities, LGBTQ intersectionalities. We'll talk about LGBT, non-binary, queer, and more. We'll be speaking about neuroatypical people or people with autism. We will be speaking about eating disorders and disordered eating, speaking to Orthodox religions, and specifically working within the Utah specific LDS or Mormon context. I have data from the Utah Division of Human Services dealing with the Utah high school age population and suicidality. We'll be speaking about PTSD and CPTSD. And then we'll be talking about SOGI, conversion therapy survivors. This phrase or this term SOGI, you may or may not be familiar with. This is a new clinical term that's starting to appear and being used more often. It stands for sexual orientation, gender identity. And that basically takes the LGBTQ acronym that is very, very long. And even in here, I'm ignoring intersex, asexual, pansexual, two-spirit. The plus is very eliminating of anything else. The SOGI is kind of an umbrella that covers sexual orientation and gender identity. Mm-hmm. I'm going to stop this screen sharing for just a second and speak to the audience. I'm going to see if I can pin this. All right. I want to make sure that before we dive into this, there's an acknowledgement that this is heavy stuff, you guys. This is a presentation that oftentimes people come to that are in a suicidal space. They come to it looking for healing. They come to this presentation looking for help because they're in that space themselves, either active suicidality or passive suicidality. And we'll talk about a little bit about what that means. If this describes you, if you were in a space right now where you're feeling a little activated, you're feeling your heart rate is elevated, your breathing is shallow and very rapid, a little bit sweaty or feeling a little bit anxious in your seat, please trust yourself. Please listen to your body. Do what you can do. Ground yourself, sit with your knees, square to the ground, feet flat on the floor. Breathe, do some deep breathing if you need to. Touch objects, listen to things, ground yourself with your 5 senses. As we're going through this, when you become, or if you become activated, please find those skills that you may have been able to use in the past that have been helpful for you to de-escalate, reintegrate your calm sense of space and healing so you can continue. If the presentation is too much, if it's too much, there's no shame in that. There's no guilt in that. There's no judgment in that, certainly. If you're in a space today where you can't be a helper, if you're in a space today where learning about helping is just too activating and too triggering for you, come back to this later. We're going to record this and make this available on Parity on various media platforms. So please take the opportunity to step away, reground yourself, and then re-engage when you are ready. going to go back and share some data from Trevor Project. Annually, Trevor does a survey for LGBTQ youth and mental health. And I've just recently kind of culled through their data. A lot of data here, and I don't want to, there is not time to talk to each piece of data in the slide deck in the presentation. I will be making this entire presentation available. If you would like to get my contact information at the very end, please email me and I'll provide this for you. But this speaks to gender identity, trans and non-binary, age group. In the past 12 months, have you wanted counseling from a mental health professional? Yes, but I didn't get it. These are the people that I became a therapist to serve. I became a therapist to be the therapist I needed when I was 12 that didn't exist. Nearly half of transgender and non-binary youth didn't receive wanted mental health care due to concerns related to the LGBTQ competence of providers. I hear this every day I work with people. They are so grateful that they have somebody that they can work with of trans identity, that they don't need to comb through, or rather break down barriers of trust, belief, legitimacy, identity confirmation from their provider. I go into that meeting with sessions with my clients, believing them from day one. That's why that it is so important for there to be an increased amount of LGBTQ competent and LGBTQ and queer therapists. So one of my life goals is to turn every queer person I meet into a therapist. Conversion therapy, I'm part of a group called Conversion Therapy Survivors. This is under the foundational voice of Dr. Michael Ferguson from Harvard Medical School. He's a neuroscientist there. Trevor also tracks conversion therapy data. 6 out of 10 LGBT youth said that they underwent some sort of conversion therapy for orientation or identity. And 10% of the youth, well, you can read the data. I don't want to spend a lot of time reading this for you. And then there is data that's showing up now and research showing up now about conversion therapy efforts with midlife and older adult men and their response to that emotionally and with increased suicidal ideation, both active and passive SI. And when I say SI, that stands for suicidal ideation. The State of Utah Department of Human Services does a SHARP survey. This is a student health and risk prevention survey. They do this every other year. And they survey 8th, 10th, and 12th graders across all backgrounds, all identities. And they track LGBTQ people quite effectively here. The data breakdown is incredibly interesting regarding bisexual individuals, that their suicidal indication and self-harm increases between 8th grade and 10th grade, and then decreases at 12th grade to go more in line with LG and trans students. So the bisexual individual has a unique set of risk factors, a unique set of considerations within the queer community. I know a lot of individuals who feel erased and invisible because of their bisexual identity, and that they may be in a straight presenting marriage or relationship, and they are not seen and their concerns aren't taken seriously because the general populace and lesbian and gay and trans people often have misconceptions about them having made their choice, which we know now is not necessarily the case. The bisexual identity is much more complex than just making one of two choices. There's specific additional risk factors for LGBTQ people. There's lots of, as we've seen and heard from Dr. Molano, the discrimination, the homelessness, poverty, undereducation, underemployment. Do we understand these? Do we understand that the non-binary and gender non-conforming individuals face additional pressure? The non-binary space is often looked at as a non-legitimate space. Do we have cultural awareness about our Black, Brown, Native American, Alaska Native, LGBTQ friends and loved ones? Do we understand their specific needs and their heightened risk of suicidality? And are we getting that information about minority communities from white people? In other words, me. Why is that problematic that we're getting our information about Black, Indigenous people of color information from someone who is white. Please seek out those voices in those communities. Those voices and that information is already available. For clinicians, are we getting that information from our clients or our patients? Are we spending a lot of time in session or in the room with them, having them educate us? Do we understand why that's problematic? Please don't add to their minority stress by making them educate you. Trans people, specific risk factors for suicidal ideation. And this is important this is the context, this is the foundational framework for when we go into the suicide prevention module that we'll go through in a minute. This background is really important so that we will be able to become better observers and better listeners of these people that we are working with. Detransitioning is a thing right now due to a lot of social pressure, familial pressure, and being able to not to pass is a huge problem. The effect of minority stress increases suicidality tremendously, both passive and active SI. Do we understand the trans masculine or gender non-binary people who still have a uterus, that still menstruate? Do we understand that they have specific and unique risk factors with suicidality? Now, some of this data is a little bit, seems convoluted, but cisgender men complete suicide 4 times more than women, because cisgender women, because they choose more lethal means. Cisgender women attempt suicide 4 to 5 times more than cisgender men, usually with more non-lethal means. So when a person that's assigned female at birth transitions to a non-binary or a binary masculine space, often they take on a social construct or a understanding of suicidal ideation and behavior that is more deadly and is more frequent. Both of those risk factors combine to make their particular demographic extremely risky or more highly at risk. Gender identities, protective measures regarding gender identity. When, if you're a clinician, if you're working in a medical field or any other field that enters people's information into a database, are you able to enter their pronouns accurately? Are you able to indicate a preferred name or a chosen name? New name aside from maybe their legal name or their insurance record name? Why are pronouns important? Why are the validation and the affirmation of pronouns, chosen pronouns, and a chosen name? Why is that so crucial to their identity formation and their affirmation? They're feeling welcome and celebrated. Why is that important? Do we understand? I'm not sure I can share all the ways that it is important, but let me tell you this. This is one of the cheapest, easiest, quickest, most effective ways to intervene in a transgender or gender non-binary person's identity and sense of self. Honoring their pronouns and honoring their name is the quickest way to decrease suicidal ideation and behavior. LGBTQ cultural intersectionalities. Eating disorders are huge in the queer community. 71% of trans people who identify as straight. Now that's an interesting data point from Trevor. The trans people that identify as straight have been diagnosed with an eating disorder. This is an attempt to control the shape of their body. This is an attempt to control either the development or the lack of development of secondary sex characteristics that will betray their inner sense of gender and take their gender and make it more incongruent. Eating disorders are a huge component, and I was super thrilled to hear Nishka addressing that in the work that she's doing in Pennsylvania now. Eating disorders are the highest morbid mental health condition. More people die by eating disorders than any other single mental health challenge or issue. And the data kind of speaks for themselves there. I worked in eating disorders for a year in California, and I don't know that I met one single client of mine that didn't have some form of suicidality, suicidal ideation, or non-lethal self-harm working within an eating disorder bubble. Neuroatypical people with autism. A friend of mine, Finn Gratton from San Jose, they are a non-binary marriage and family therapist and professional clinical counselor. Finn has written an amazing book working with people that are both identify as transgender and autistic. Finn and I have we have a professional relationship where I can call them and gain some data. I spoke with them a couple months ago when I gave this presentation at Utah Valley University, and Finn shared with me some of the information that they had regarding the lack of data and why it's hard to get data regarding overlap with autistic and transgender populations, largely because it's hard to diagnose both populations. Often populations don't get diagnosed until later on in life. Often populations, especially with autistic people, never get diagnosed because diagnosing is expensive, it's prohibitive, it's hard to find someone who's competent. Often, as is the case with trans population as well, sometimes we diagnose each other. We are diagnosed by community. We see traits and characteristics in our friends and people that we know, and we might ask them, hey, have you considered the thought about, or have you thought about this? And often that's how many people understand about their own identity as a transgender person and their own identity as a person with autism. So this book is available from Finn on Amazon. A critical piece of information for anyone working with transgender and autistic people. The American Association of Suicidology presented a workshop this fall working specifically at the intersection of autism and suicidality. And there is a very specific way of working with people that have or experience autism, especially with communication around emotions, community building, relational building, interpersonal sharing of emotions sometimes can be very difficult for people with autism. And I know that often on the helper side of the equation, we want to jump in and we want to have an answer very quickly. And we want to know, what we can do to help them in the moment. People with autism often will need additional time to process. They will need to be spoken to with words revolving around logic and less words revolving around feelings. I can't use the words, how does this make you feel? And oftentimes the autistic person just feels disconnected in general because of the autistic, stress and literally trauma that they've been experiencing their entire life due to being autistic and due to not being understood by the general population just because they're autistic or neurodivergent. So neurotypical people, please become aware, especially if you're going to work within suicide prevention, please become aware of the specific requirements or needs from our autistic friends. Religiosity and trauma. My friend Brian Simmons from the University of Georgia, in his PhD dissertation in 2017, interviewed a large cross-section of believing and non-believing or former Mormons. I am a former Mormon and I took this survey. And in this survey, Dr. Simmons understood that 73.4% of the respondents in the survey would qualify for PTSD based on the things, the gospel doctrinal tenets that they learned in church week in, week out within the Mormon faith tradition. I know as a clinician, often trauma is not understood clearly until we have a chance to process that, sometimes with a mental health professional or someone who knows a little bit more about trauma. And I have a sneaking suspicion that if we were to interview these people in the room, we would understand that their traumatic experiences would be higher than 73.4% of the respondents. Now, I could say that with some certainty as a clinician that has worked with lots of people who have experienced religious trauma within the LGBT sphere and within Mormonism. And I have to concede that there is no data around my opinion on this. Protective factors. How can we help? This Russell Pollock-Grossman study, when we have these 4 different social dimensions that we work with in homeschool, work, and friends, and when our name and our pronouns as trans people, when they are honored and celebrated, in each of those areas, our suicidal risk becomes lower as the affirmation and the celebration becomes broader. This speaks back to this quickest, fastest, cheapest, most effective interventions working with suicidality and transgender people. This is a dear family, friends of mine in Chatsworth, California. Just love this family to death, who have wrapped in love from day one their transgender sibling. Dr. Caitlin Ryan from the University, or San Francisco State University, I'm sorry, has this amazing project called the Family Acceptance Project, which I use all the time in my working with families, refer to it constantly, either in a secular space or a non-secular space. She has data that spans, I believe it's between 15 and 20 years regarding family acceptance and reducing the risk of suicidality with LGBT people, young people. Interestingly enough, there is a version that was written specifically for a Mormon audience or a Latter-day Saint audience. And these are available on her website, Family Acceptance Project. I believe it's .org. And Google can be your friend in this regard as well. Before I became a therapist, I was a photographer. I was a documentary photographer, and I spent 3 years and photographed 137 Mormon moms who had LGBTQ kids, and these Mormon moms expressed to me their undying love and support for their queer child. And it was such an amazing experience for me that we decided, the royal we, me, myself, and I decided to photograph these women and have them provide essays that I edited down and turned into a project I call the Mama Dragon Story Project. And this was the stepping stone for me to becoming a therapist. It was also my own suicide prevention tool, as I indicated at the end. Moms are important in the home. QPR. So I want to make sure that we understand that this is not an official QPR presentation. I've given those in the past. And what I've decided is that I appreciate the science behind the QPR protocol. It is based in best practices, and it is nationally and internationally recognized as a very effective tool. What I've found is I like to tailor my QPR presentations more and more towards trauma, intersectionality, and LGBTQ experience. And QPR has a challenge letting me change the presentation and still be within a QPR approved format. And so what I've done is I've just kind of taken the nuggets of QPR that I feel are the most important, and I wrap them inside a larger presentation. So I want to make sure we understand that this is not an officially sanctioned QPR presentation. What we're going to do today is we're going to train you as gatekeepers to recognize communication events, suicidal communication events. They're called SCEs. We're going to recognize those communication events within people who are or who are not actively suicidal. And this is important. This background that we've provided for you now is important so that you understand when you're working with different people, how to interact, how to be more aware, how to listen a little bit better. So as we prepare to be a crisis helper, we have kind of 5 decisions to make before we are really going to assist and engage with that person. Noticing the situation, interpreting the situation. Are we going to take any responsibility ourselves for what's going on? Or are we going to let this just go by? I have to make a decision how to help. And then I have to make a decision to do the decision, to implement the help. So I'm going to say that with this crowd, we probably have interpreted suicide as a situation that is an emergence, has an emergent characteristic to it. It is an emergency, suicidality. I see that we are taking personal responsibility. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Deciding how to help. You're learning how to help today. And I think you kind of have already decided, if you're in this presentation, you've already decided how to implement that decision. You just don't know what to do yet. So kind of these other 4 things you already know. The answer is yes, I'm noticing, or I want to learn how to notice better. I want to learn how to interpret it as an emergency better. I've already decided to take responsibility and jump into action, but I'm not quite sure how. I'm going to slide my chat window open here. Oh, nope, I can't. You know what, Marion? I'm going to turn my phone back on so that if you need to text me, I'm not sure how I'm going to find out if there are questions that are being asked, other than Marion texting me those questions that may be being asked. All right, that's open now. There, she just said, I'll text you. Yes. Do we love technology? I love it. Thank you, Marian. I noticed earlier that some of the letters and some of the characters in my presentation are misbehaving a little bit. So please bear with me. Suicide myths and facts. No one can stop a suicide. It is inevitable. Wrong. That is not correct. Usually people that are in crisis, once they get help that they need, they may never, and the data indicates they probably will never be suicidal again. This is all from QPR, which is a best practices research-based intervention. Confronting a person about suicide will only make them angry and increase the risk of suicide. Wrong. They're grateful usually and very thankful that anybody cares at all and that you're ready to engage. Only experts can prevent suicide. Boy, I hope not, because I certainly need the help. And I feel like I'm the helper of the other experts. I'm like a person in the middle, helping the people above me. And then I get the chance to train the people who are just entering into this circle newly with a new commitment. So I hope that we don't have to be experts to prevent suicide, because I don't consider myself an expert at all. I just consider myself someone who wants to help. And I think that's kind of an important place to start from. Suicidal people do not keep their plans to themselves. That's what these suicidal communication events are so important to understand and recognize. Those who talk about suicide don't do it. That's actually not true either. Once a person decides to complete a suicide, there's nothing you can do. Wrong. It is the most preventable kind of death. And I like this idea that almost any positive action might save a life. Anything. All right, here we go. SCEs. Boy, what is with my funky little characters? I'll have to go back and fix that, I suppose. We have indirect ways that people talk, and we have direct ways that people talk. Have we heard any of this language before? From people that either were suicidal or weren't suicidal? Another thing to consider that can be important, have we ourselves used either the indirect language or the direct language? Have we used that language when we were not suicidal? Have we used that language in jest with sarcasm? And maybe taking that to the next level, have we used this language in a way to manipulate and to bully other people into doing something that we may have wanted them to? Or have we felt other people have used that language and weaponized it in their relationships and their interactions with us? These are important phrases to be listening for, both from other people and within our own vernacular. Am I using these phrases and I'm not really suicidal? Because I can guarantee you this, if you use these phrases around me, I'm going to stop whatever's going on and we're going to jump into an intervention. I will take you seriously. I will trust and I will believe you. Suicidal communication events, there are behavioral clues and situational cues. One of the things that's important to understand about suicidality is that when an individual, there's like a trifecta, there's a three-prong sense of, or there are three major risk factors that if they appear together, now we have to get, kind of seriously concerned about this person. Those three areas are, if this person feels helplessness, if this person feels hopelessness, and they are two different things, if they feel those two things, as well as having a fear of becoming a burden to others, now we need to really be aware of how this person is behaving, how this person is acting. Are they making plans? Are they acting in other ways? Hopelessness, and becoming a burden, or feeling like they are a burden to others. That is the cocktail that leads to suicidality, particularly if the person is impulsive, particularly if the person has access to easy deadly means. Untreated depression. This is an important statistic. Untreated depression is the leading cause of death by suicide. if you do not seek help for your depression, if others around you that are depressed aren't seeking help for their depression, that is the leading cause to death by suicide. This is a table from a study out of England of a cohort of individuals who did die by suicide. Their deaths were confirmed as deaths by suicide. And the research team correlated that with users of Twitter. So they found a cohort of individuals who had died by suicide and were using Twitter, and they were sharing these phrases in their tweets prior to their death. So Twitter, as we know, is a platform where you are only able to share a certain amount of characters. And within those certain amount of characters, these are the messages that people are sharing prior to a death by suicide. These are some of the things that we can also be aware of as observers and listeners for people who are possibly entering into crisis. We need to be familiar with these phrases and these terms so that we can further attune ourselves to other people who are expressing self-doubt about life or indicating a desire to die by suicide. So QPR, what does it stand for? CPR is cardiopulmonary resuscitation. If Dr. Molano can confirm that I said that right, or if I said it wrong. CPR is the way we keep people alive. The general public can keep people alive during a heart attack, cardiac arrest. QPR is a modality designed for the general public to engage with people who are suicidal. That's the analogy, or that's the other analog. So Q stands for question, P stands for persuade, and R stands for refer. Question, persuade, and refer. The question is the main part of QPR, and we're going to spend some time on this idea of asking the question. And I think you guys know what the question may be, but we'll kind of dance around it a little bit here in an attempt to not make it too confrontational or too sudden. If you're in doubt, don't wait to ask the question, just ask it. We've learned that that person will not be too offended. They might be relieved. If the person is reluctant, be persistent. Be persistent within the context of your relationship with that person. Do not be aggressive. Do not be belligerent. Do not be a bully. Don't be mean. Please don't be mean. Once you ask the question, please learn how to be quiet. Please learn how to just listen and be with that person. Allowing the person to talk freely is going to require oftentimes a tremendous suspension of your ego. Set it aside. Do not make this about you. This is about the person you're working with. Please give yourself plenty of time. Please give that person answering the question plenty of time. They're going to need it. They're going to need it in order to feel safe. They're going to need it in order to feel trusted by you. And they're going to need it to be able to verbalize it. They're going to need that time because they may not have verbalized this. They may not have expressed this openly ever. And it might take some time. Have your resources handy, and those resources we'll talk about at the end. Crisis line phone numbers are a good place to start. Do you have a therapist's name? Do you have, do you know the systems that are in place, the services that are in your area that you can refer these individuals in crisis to? You're going to have those ready, guess what? Before you ask the question. This takes some preparation, as you will see as we progress. By the way, prepare for this to be a challenge. Prepare for asking the question to be difficult. In the QPR, there's an essay, the research study by the QPR Institute talking about training professionals, and that the single most difficult thing was to ask them about the question, or to ask the question. I mean, they're doing role plays with trained actors who are giving either indirect or direct signs. And they're training mental health professionals, medical professionals, and other professionals how to inquire about SI plans, past history. And it was difficult just to directly ask the question, even for people who are trained. So if you're not a trained professional, please hold yourself with grace and compassion. When you ask the question, you may find some things coming up within yourself that are a little difficult to understand. You might feel anxious. You might feel scared. You might feel worried. Good, and good. That tells me you're in it. You're engaged. You're not asking this question in a frivolous way. You're taking this seriously. Well, what the heck is the question? There's a less direct approach and there's a direct approach. As with people communicating their suicidality, there's the direct and the indirect approach. There's the same thing that can happen with asking the question around suicidality. Less direct approach. Let's think about this. Does this even attempt to ask the question? Does it even come close? Have you been unhappy lately? Well, yeah, I've been unhappy many times and I've not been suicidal. Have you been very unhappy lately? Yes, I've been very unhappy lately and I haven't been suicidal. Have you been so unhappy lately that you've been thinking about it in your life? Okay, so now we're getting close. This last question, I actually do like this question. And this helps me understand, as a clinician who works with people who are suicidal nearly every day, this helps me decide whether or not they're experiencing passive suicidal ideation or if they're experiencing active suicidal ideation. And what's the difference? Passive suicidal ideation is when they just have thoughts, wishes, oh, I wish I could have cancer and just die. Or I wish that tragic car crash would happen and I would just die. I wish I could go to sleep and never wake up. Another version of this last question that I like to ask is, would you like to go to sleep and when you woke up, your problems would all be taken care of? These are good ways to determine whether or not the person really wants to die or if they just want their problems to go away. The direct approach. Well, when people are as upset as you seem to be, now there's some judgment in there. Be careful. They sometimes wish they were dead. I'm wondering if you're feeling that way too. Now think about the autistic person. Think about the language that we just talked about that doesn't work with a person that's autistic. This is not the way to ask an autistic person whether or not they're suicidal. You look pretty miserable. I wonder if you're thinking about suicide. Now we're getting closer. Are you thinking about killing yourself? That is the direct question. I like to soften it just a little tiny bit. And I like to say, do you have any plans in this moment to die by suicide? And then the person kind of has a chance to think about, okay, right now, it's a very centering, it's a very grounding question. They have to address how they're feeling in the moment. So that's the question. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about dying by suicide? If you are not ready to ask the question, that's okay. If you feel you're working with somebody who needs to have the question asked to them and you're unable to do it, find someone else who can. And there's no judgment in that. You're doing the best you can in the moment. Also, let's think about the past two slides, the indirect and the direct questioning. It's kind of not important really how you ask it. I mean, to an extent, the most important thing is that you're asking the question at all. All right. I want to stop the sharing, but we're going to do this, you guys. Let's practice this. And it might be difficult. I'm going to stop sharing and I want to see the chat. I'm looking at the chat. And I want you to ask yourself this. I want you to ask an imaginary person sitting in an empty, we call this the empty chair technique. We use it all the time in psychotherapy. Ask someone who's not there in the empty chair, do you have any current plans to die by suicide? Ask them that. Look in the mirror. Now, this may be a challenge. If you look in the mirror and ask yourself, this is taking it pretty literally because you are asking yourself. If you can't ask it, Type it out. And I see we've got 4 people left. Thank you for sticking around. This will live on in an archive. And so this will not be the only time that people get a chance to do this. Go ahead and ask. Stacy, do you currently have any plans to die by suicide? Now, Jeffrey, this is a good question. Hurting yourself is not necessarily suicidality. There is a thing that we call non-suicidal self-injury, self-harm, cutting, bruising, burning. Sometimes, we hurt ourselves, ice burns. Sometimes we hurt ourselves intentionally to either dull pain or to incite pain or to control pain. There's a lot of different reasons that we do self-harm. And I would dare say that the hurting of oneself does not necessarily mean that they're considering suicide. So I'm not sure that that is a very direct way of asking the question. That's a very indirect way of asking the question. And they might say yes, and they may not be suicidal. So I like the fact that you're there. I like the fact that you're asking that question, but maybe let's ratchet that up a notch. Ooh, Freddy, could you please expand on the please learn how to be quiet? Can you sit in your own self for 10 seconds, for 15 seconds, for 20 seconds after asking that question and keep your mouth shut? Can you? Freddy, Dr. Molano, do you right now have any plans to die by suicide?
Wow, what a question. But it is like sometimes we come my attention because the QPR, I think very few of us are aware of that terminology. And I think that sometimes because we want to help the client so much, or the patient, we want to throw many things at him or her. And I think that I really like that part of your presentation on saying learning to stay quiet. It's not about me, it's about the patient. And I think that that's something that as providers, we need to practice more.
And you've seen me be quiet for 15, 20 seconds now. And you haven't answered the question yet. So I'm going to ask you again, Dr. Molano. Do you currently have any plans to die by suicide?
I don't think that right now I have it, but your presentation made me realize that I had some of those thoughts in my mind, if I want to be honest with myself.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
And as a friend and as a therapist, I want to validate those feelings. I want to celebrate your vulnerability and your honesty with me. And I want to normalize what you might be feeling. And I want to share something with you. 80% of everyone you ever see on any given day has a fleeting or a passing thought about suicide on any given day. 80%. So if you have a thought about suicide that's not active, that's not, gathering a method or writing a note or planning a date, if you have those thoughts in your head, those are pretty normal. So I want to normalize that. And if it gets to a point where it's beyond just occasionally, if we scale it from a 0 to a 10, if your passive suicidality is around a 1 or a 2 or a 3, that's pretty normal. But when we spike up to a 7, an 8, or a 9, that's when we might want to get a little bit more involved in a little more thorough suicide assessment. But thank you for your vulnerability, Dr. Molano. I love that. Stacy is yes. If you don't know what to say, now be careful with that, because in QPR, you're going to learn how to know what to say. And I want to validate that it might be hard to get that answer back and know exactly in that moment what to do. I often like to just sit and listen and not try and solve the problem. And then when I hear that there's a place that I can jump in and be of more service. Now, my role as a clinician is a little bit different than just the general public. But part of what you're going to learn today is to have resources ready to go if and when the person says, well, yeah, I am. But if they're having passive suicidal thoughts, the validation, the empathy, the love, just the caring and just the sitting with the person, that is probably the biggest thing you can possibly do for them. Thank you for the question. And it is interesting. Stacey's being very vulnerable, and I appreciate that. Noticing some of these feelings that you've had in your head in a presentation like this, totally normal. We are talking about it on a really deep level. My brain model is in my bag. If I had it, I would grab it and I would show you where those messages, those are stored in our brain. They're hardwired into who we are neurologically. So if you're having those passive thoughts, that's totally normal. All right, I'm gonna go back to sharing again. Thank you, by the way, for those of you who asked the question. This is the, wow, settle down, Kimberly, having a moment of countertransference. This way of asking the question just makes me absolutely bristle, mainly because this question is soaked in shame and guilt. This is the absolute worst way to ask the question. Well, you're not suicidal, are you? Who does that make the question about? Who does that center in the conversation? It's kind of a demand, isn't it? It's kind of an expectation. Well, you're not suicidal, are you? I'm telling you the answer I want to hear. I'm letting you know the answer that's going to make me feel comfortable. I'm also going to know, I'm letting you know the answer that if I hear it back, it's going to make me really uncomfortable. So when you ask the person, well, you're not going to die by suicide, are you? You've never given suicide a thought, have you? Be prepared for that person to lie to you. Be prepared for that person to say no. Yeah, if you want to always guarantee that the people you're asking this question to are always going to say no, ask the question like this. If you want to guarantee a way to rupture the relationships of trust and safety with the people you're working with and asking these questions, ask them the question like this. And if you want to make sure that you build a relationship of safety and trust, if you want to make sure that they know the question being asked is not about them, or not about you, but it's about them, ask it the way we've already talked about before. Don't ask it like this. Think of all the awful ways, all the shaming and guilting ways you could ask this question, and just feel and imagine how that would make you feel inside. And then imagine, would you want that person you're working with, would you want them to have those feelings when you're asking that question? I would dare say that you do not. All right. After the question, you're going to either hear a yes or a no. And when you hear a yes, your job then is to shift into persuade. Notice that there's not a react. There's not a freak out. There's not a head explode. Maybe that's a bad euphemism for a suicide prevention. You'll notice there's not going a little bit overboard on this. What you do next is you persuade. You don't react, you respond. A reaction is something we do that's not planned. A response is something we do that is planned. You want to respond, and you want to persuade them to stay alive. Listen to their problem. Give them your full attention. Again, keep your mouth shut. Suicide is not the problem, ultimately. It's their perceived solution to a problem that they have a hard time figuring out. Do not rush to judgment about suicide. This is what I learned working with Native American populations. Do not judge anybody else's suicidality. Don't judge it. You are not them. You have not walked in their shoes. You don't know their life. You don't know their cultural background. You don't know their cultural acceptance of suicidal events or suicidality. You don't know. You don't get to judge. Offer any help you can. Offer any hope in any form you can. Let's go have a taco. That would be my favorite intervention, a taco-vention, really. Please resist the temptation to use shame and guilt when persuading someone to stay alive. Don't weaponize other people in the orbit of the person who's suicidal. Don't weaponize those people's reaction. Well, what would your kids think? Well, how would your, don't do that. Don't lather on the shame and the guilt. There are other ways you can persuade people to stay alive. One of the ways that I like to talk about, or one of the ways that I like to use, or the techniques that I like to use, is ask them about their legacy. Look for the strengths in that person. Look for the ways that they've been a helper. Look for the ways in which they have served. Look for the ways in which they have extended empathy and compassion to other people, and ask them, are you done doing that? Would you like to do that more? Well, if you would, then let's make sure you stick around for a while. And if you're done with that, well, then maybe we can talk about something else. One of the funny ways I can talk about it is back to the taco intervention. I'd find out what their favorite food is. And I'd say, well, think of all the pizza. Think of all the pizza you'll never get to eat. Now, you like pizza, right? There's a lot of pizza left to be eaten. For me, I've never met a taco truck I didn't like. I have a lot of tacos left to eat. Finding any hope or any reason that they have to stay alive for it's worth it. Part of the persuading is being committed, being ready to be committed to going with them to get help. Are you prepared to drive to their therapist with them? Are you prepared to drive to the ER with them? Are you prepared to help them check into the psych ward if that's what they need to do? Are you prepared to take them to their next level? Or are you just content with handing them a phone number and saying, all right, so long, nice knowing you? Because if that's all you're going to do, you could have just texted them that and saved them the trouble. Be ready with a commitment, with a significant commitment to jump in and help in a way that they can't help themselves. Just the fact that you're able and you're willing to jump in is going to give them an idea that somebody cares. It's going to give them a sliver and a glimmer of hope. Refer. So we've questioned, we've persuaded, and really all you're trying to do is just convince them to get some help. Now, what do we do? Oh, well, I better have some resources ready. Taking them directly to the person that can help is the best way. And let them kind of decide. They may have a bad history with being checked into the hospital. They may have a bad experience of going to the ER. They may have a bad experience with a police response to a wellness check. They may have a bad experience with that. So ask them what they would like you to do, what referral sources they already have. And if they're not working with anybody, then you kind of have to escalate and think about maybe you do need to take them to the hospital to be assessed. Maybe you do need to go with them and help them check in. Getting a commitment from them is important, but also helping them make arrangements to get the help is really important, because now there's some accountability. Now there's something riding on this. Oh, there's some social currency in play. I've helped you and you've said you would receive help. Let's go do this. Oh, crap. Now I have to kind of go do this. Third best is giving them information and getting a good faith commitment not to complete an attempt. If you can have some forward thinking, a forward commitment, oh, let's look for a therapist in the future. Let's think about this in the future. Even just a kind of a loose commitment, that's better than nothing. At this point, you'll take anything you can. And the less committal they are to you, to getting future help, the more you're going to want to check in with them and follow up and follow up and follow up until they are able to make a more significant level of commitment. So still on the referring, find yourself a team. clergy, therapists, psychiatrists, whoever is going to provide the counseling. Join their team, meet those people, reach out to those people, understand what resources they have that they can pass to you, like this presentation. Follow up with a visit, a phone call, whatever feels comfortable. The following up is important because it shows that you're continually engaged and that you continually care. By the way, last line, you might save a life. You really might just save a life just by caring. I know that's true. I know that's true. Exhibit A. Accompanying them is important. Securing an agreement can be important. That agreement, be careful with a no suicide contract. Clinically, we know that those are not effective. We know that a no suicide contract, we don't use those anymore clinically. Instead, what we do is a safety plan or contracting for safety, which is similar to this language at the front, securing an agreement to stay alive. Focus, emphasize, concentrate on the continuing ability to live instead of a commitment not to die. Shifting the emphasis is subtle, but it is important. Stanley Brown Safety Plan. I use this all the time clinically. I refer to this quite often when I'm giving presentations. I ask people in groups that I run to download this and implement this in their life. The Stanley Brown Safety Plan is a best practices form. It's a template for helping individuals identify pillars of strength, coping skills, relationships, current treatment professionals that can be part of a plan to stay alive. The best thing about the Stanley Brown Safety Plan is that you do not need to be a clinician to do this. You can download this off of the internet. You do a Google search for Stanley Brown Safety Plan. You will find a downloadable PDF. Print it out. I recommend printing it out so that you have it handy. Often if we just save things digitally, they get lost, they get misplaced. But if you're a person working with someone who's in crisis, or if you are that person, please download this, please print it out, and please stick it on your fridge. Stick it on your mirror, stick it on both. Have a copy on your person, in your wallet, in your purse, where in the bottom of your shoe, I don't care. Have a copy of this filled out and ready to go when you're feeling moments of crisis. It is critical that this plan, this template, it's critical that it's filled out prior to a crisis. Because when you're in crisis mode, your limbic brain is in charge. Your primitive lizard, chicken, shark, rooster, dinosaur brain, that brain is in charge. And your prefrontal cortex, your higher forms of thinking, your nebulous forms of solving problems, those are not accessible to you. You would literally have an impossible time filling out a safety plan like this when you are in crisis. Please do this prior to an event. It's going to ask you for people and social settings that provide distraction, and you can ask for help. It's going to ask for phone numbers. My recommendation is that you call these people before you're in crisis. Arrange that understanding so that they know what's going on. Consent will be actually pretty important here. They may not want to be part. They may not be ready. They may not know. They themselves might be in a crisis spot that you're not aware of, which would make them not only unavailable, but it would make it worse for you to reach out to them. So please call these people prior to a crisis and have the conversation. Often just letting them know you're concerned about your safety, that you're concerned about having a plan, and having an honest conversation about this prior to an event, this can lower your suicidal ideation. It is literally a protective factor. Those conversations with the people you trust and feel safe with, that is suicide prevention. Please Google and download this PDF file. print it out, and then fill it out. I can't stress this nearly enough. There are national resources for LGBT individuals. The gender spectrum, I lecture with them and present with them often. These are people I know and trust. They have an amazing network of workshops, presentations, educational materials for trans youth, parents of trans children, professionals who work with transgender people, professionals who are transgender. And they have a wonderful website that's very deep and full of resources. They have online groups right now for different types of trans youth groups that need to meet. They also have online groups for parents and for professionals as well. PFLAG is tremendously helpful, working with the parents, working with families. GSLEN, having the chapters in schools, the GSAs in schools, incredibly important work they do there. The HRC, national work, legislative work. Trevor Project is doing important work with suicide prevention. Their national survey, their annual survey is tremendous amount of data. Excuse me. And then the Trans Lifeline, I want to emphasize them just for a minute. Oh, excuse me. These are friends of mine from San Francisco. I know these people. Trans Lifeline was started in the Bay, and they are the only transgender and gender non-binary crisis hotline, exclusively for trans and non-binary people. Trevor kind of ends their services to you once you're 21, 22, 23. I've swallowed on something. Choked on something. Excuse me. And if you're older than a certain age, Trevor kind of tries to push you to the National Suicide Prevention Hotline or to other hotlines. Trans Lifeline won't do that. They will talk to you regardless of your age. They also have a Hispanic or a Spanish language version of the hotline. They are also the only one that won't send out the police on a wellness check without your consent. Trans Lifeline. All right, we are at the end. I kind of flew through a lot of stuff, you guys. This was really dense in a very short amount of time. I want to give a chance at the end, maybe Freddy and Marion and I can have a conversation about what's going on. Please, if you found this helpful, please reach out to me. You can reach me at my email address, kanderson.amft@gmail.com. And my clinical practice is located with Flourish Therapy. I'm going to bring Freddy and Marion back on. And maybe we can finish with just having a little bit of a conversation. Any questions in the chat that I missed? No, not really. Thank you, Stacy. Any thoughts from Marion or from Freddy, from either of you? I know that you do this work consistently, and I'm wondering if there's anything that you can contribute that I didn't cover.
Well, I think that this was a very profound presentation, and I think that the one part, maybe coming from the provider's point, that we don't think about these issues within us. And even when you ask me the question, I think that you touched an area that I hardly ever will be aware of, or because I don't want to be aware of that. And I don't want you use one word that even kind of throws me off a little bit, but it's true, and I like it. Being accepting that we are vulnerable, because again, as providers, we don't want to accept that. And sometimes you come home with so much weight on your shoulders. And so those questions that you put in there, I have felt it. Like sometimes I say, God, I wish that I can sleep and not wake up tomorrow. so I don't have to feel about that today. And in coming through these last few months that you want to help and you want to do something, and then those scarce moments when you find yourself just dealing with yourself, it's like, I don't want to listen. So I appreciate that you do that, because I was looking for one, like you were talking to me as a person and not as the whole group.
Right.
And I think that what I'm learning from this is that we have to bring this more to providers. I bet that if we bring this presentation to a whole bunch of clinicians, which most of the time doctors believe that they are higher than thou and they are goddesses, I think that having to accept this will be very important.
I give this presentation to therapists all the time. And it's amazing how much they share with me that they learned that they didn't know before.
Yeah.
I also know that individuals, frontline personnel, are at heightened risk for suicidal ideation, both passive and active SI. There's a really kind of a hidden epidemic, really, with mental health providers, medical providers of all stripes, with suicidality, both attempted and completed. It's a significant problem, especially right now.
Yep.
Marian, any thoughts?
That's true for clergy as well.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the rate of diagnosed depression in clergy is mid 60%, and that's diagnosed.
Wow.
Yeah, but also, thinking about the comments in the chat and our other discussion, the people, like you said, Kimberly, who are drawn to learning about how to help people are, I think, often people that kind of need to be aware of their own need for help. And I'll use my I words here. I'm someone that needs to be really aware of surrounding myself with community and with people that check in with me. So I think that this is important for all of us.
Yep.
Important for us to revisit this topic again and again to stay fresh with the current research.
Agreed. And thank you for the vulnerability. I consider myself Exhibit A as well, both in terms of wanting more training because I never feel like I have enough, like I can always do more, but also in terms of understanding my own emotions, my own feelings about my own journey with suicide. And I know that when I work with my clients, if I can speak about, suicidal ideation and have an ability to share my journey with them, it makes them that much more willing to open up about their journey. One of the ways that I just kind of get right to it during an assessment is I'll say, tell me about your relationship with suicide. I'll just say that. And often they will do the exact same thing that you just did, Dr. Molano. They'll go, you're assuming, and it's really funny that what goes through their head is you're assuming I have a relationship with suicide. And then they go, well, who am I kidding? Of course, I have a relationship with suicide. And then they go, well, that was pretty, brazen of you to even just ask me that I would do that. But then why wouldn't you do that? Because I'm in these these escalated groups. The people that I work with, 98% of my caseload are transgender people, non-binary people. I think out of my entire caseload, I have 3 people that are just gay.
Wow.
So if I know that out of my caseload, 91% of them have experienced suicidal ideation, and I don't assume that they have a relationship with suicide, that's malpractice. So I go into it. Now, as therapists, we're taught, don't assume anything about our clients, and know about the cultural competencies from the people that we're working with. So if I have a trans person sit down in my chair that came from an Orthodox religious environment, that's been rejected by their family, that is in a non-binary space, that's not passing well, I can assume they're probably underemployed. They're probably not insured. I mean, I'll know whether they're insured or not by the time they get to me, but I know pretty much that they have an experience or they have a relationship with suicide, if not within their own self, within their own being, certainly within the people that they orbit around, certainly within the people that they know. They more than likely have lost someone to suicide. So that is a relationship with suicide just right there. So for me not to ask about their relationship with suicide, I consider it malpractice. So I assume. And if they say no, then I say, thank you. Tell me how you got to this place where you don't have a relationship with suicide. I'd like to know more about that. And that can be part of their safety planning. It can be part of their identifying, pillars of strength. It can be part of identifying ways that they've self-soothed in the past. I may learn that they have coping skills that I can use and share with other clients and myself. Maybe when my emotions are spiking or are a lot of control. What self-care do you take as a clinician? Thank you for asking. Ooh, making me squirm a little bit in my chair. I like to ground myself in nature. I like to listen to very loud music to the point where my tinnitus is not getting any better. And I'm okay with that. Tinnitus as a form of self-care. Why not? I love food. I love to eat. My waistline will confirm that. No guilt or shame about food, especially after working in eating disorders. I have 5 therapists that I turn to. Like literally, I have a core group of 5 people I turn to if I need to when things get rough. And I thank them every time I reach out to them. And I'm part of their circle as well. I like to get in my canoe and go up and down the river or whatever else, flat water is around. And I was a photographer for the majority of my life. And so that was my self-care for the earliest part, for the prior part of my life. I am a very strong believer in the practice of mindfulness. I believe in the power of meditation and just being still can be very healing. And my self-care too is vulnerability. My self-care is authenticity. My self-care is carving out that space at the table that may not be there. That's my self-care. My self-care is making sure people know I'm here. My self-care is being an example for someone else. My self-care is being visible for a youth who might need a role model. My self-care is being visible for parents who might need some reassurance that their kids aren't going to end up crazy and homeless and destitute and dead on the streets. That's my self-care. Does that part of my self-care take a toll? Yeah, it kind of does, but it's worth it in the end. My self-care that doesn't take a toll is when I hole up at home, surround myself with all the soft, fuzzy things, eat all the good food, turn on all the really awful, trashy TVs and films and things I can watch, and just exist and just enjoy that moment. That's the self-care that doesn't take a toll. COVID has brought a new level of lack of self-care. Mm-hmm. These conversations are self-care.
Yeah.
Reaching out to my friends whom I miss and love dearly, that is self-care. That's what I do. Stacy, thank you for the question. What do you guys do, Marion and Dr. Molano? If we can be bold and brazen.
How about you, Freddy? What do you do?
I usually have what I call my best therapy. Is when I get to spend time with my cats.
Oh, I love that.
Because they really, before I always have these fancy cats, and the first time that I have cats that I adopted before they were put to sleep, and both of them, they're really, this morning I was crazy and I went jogging in Central Park. Go early because it's so beautiful. And I try to believe that it's a little garden. I call it my little garden. It's a black river from where I live. And I say, wow. It's amazing. It always amazes me that it's so, this park. It's in the middle of a jungle of steel, cement, and I can be totally away. And I wish that, but learning from today's session, I need to think about a little more about self-care. And what is that Kimberly, that I also learned? I didn't reach the point. I had it, but I lost it. The point on when do I detach myself from the provider and be myself. Yeah. That's that.
When do you quit getting to be Dr. Molano? When do you just get to be Freddy?
Yeah, I like being Freddy more than like Molano as I'm getting older. But also, every time that I take a couple of days, I feel like I find another way to be more productive, more of help somebody else.
All right, Marion, you dodged the question. Now your turn.
You always notice things, Kimberly.
Yeah,
I'm a therapist.
She's good at that.
So my big 3 things are rest, being sure I get enough sleep at night, eating well, being aware of eating and drinking water, and exercise. And I try to spend some of that exercise time outside every day. And I found that that is super important. If I don't do those things for myself, I'm not good for other people.
I love the self-awareness and I love the honesty. Can I share a part of my self-care that revolves around you, Marion? Yeah.
Yeah.
You have the cutest, oh my gosh, that Aussie Shepherd.
Bubba, he's Kimberly.
That dog, that's like my dream dog. If Bubba had a tail, I would steal Bubba.
Okay, we're gonna do, when we are safe to do so, you're gonna have a visit with Bubba, and in 5 minutes, you will no longer want Bubba. But
why is that?
I'm curious.
Has such a piercing bark. I love the guy, but he has so much energy and he's so loud.
But when he rested, he looks like he's really out. I mean,
Yes,
totally
yes.
detached.
Either 110% or he's zonked out. Yes.
So can I get him when he's on his way down towards more like 18 or 10%? I'll take him then.
Okay, yeah.
But I'm serious. That little dog just melts my heart.
Yeah.
And Freddie, when you talked about your cats, I'm just like, oh, yes. The pet therapy is huge. In fact, one of my goals, as soon as I can, is to get a rescue dog and make it a therapy dog, because I know the healing power of pets is just so incredibly strong.
Sometimes when I get home and I just feel like crying because of how heavy the day was, especially in this pandemic, I not even greet the cats until I have my shower. That's how crazy I am. So I come from work, I take my shower, and then I say hi to them. And the other day, something happened very nicely that I make myself my martini.
Yes.
Well,
okay,
yeah,
so now we need to have a chat about that.
Yeah, and then when I come back, have my shower, and I'm like, what is the cat? What is the cat? Maybe he's mad at me. I opened the refrigerator to make my second drink, and he was chilling inside. He was just, hi, remember me? In that moment, like all the problems from the day, all the sadness from the day melted away. It's like, this is, I mean, he's blind, he's deaf, and he's mute, he's just learning to talk because they were abused. But, and the same thing with the little one, the girl. She just has this tendency of coming and putting her paw on my martini and then lick her paw. And I say, wait a moment, I'm not subsidizing your drinking problem.
Bartender.
But yeah, that's animal therapy is pretty good, which is another thing that bothers me because many of our patients that I work with, they would like to have a cat, they would like to have a dog, but because of the transient nature of the living arrangement, they're not able to.
Right.
Yeah. That would be so helpful if we can do something. I don't know why, but.
so that's why one of my goals is to have a dog with me, so that when I do my visits or when they come to me, they have
They
a
can
chance
play with
to join with that,
Yeah.
in that dog or that cat, probably a dog. Yeah. I told you we would go till 2. Do we want to, are there any other questions from the Jeffrey, Polly, or Stacy? Any other questions from you guys? Maybe you can share some self-care that you engage in, or maybe we can think about wrapping up. I just want to say thanks to Marian, to Freddy, to Nishka for the wonderful thoughts and conversation and the work that you're doing in your sphere of influence that I will never see, but I will always appreciate and respect and love you for doing. Yeah, this has been very good. And I want to thank Jeffrey, Polly, and Stacy. Meditation, positive affirmations. Yes. Piano, exercise, hot tub, alone time without your kids. Yes. Self-care. These things are critical. Make sure you have time for you.
Yes.
Any other closing? I'm going to leave it to Marian to close since you opened us so eloquently.
Now I'm on the spot, Kimberly. I would like to sincerely say thank you to the people who are in attendance today, because I know that we all experience Zoom fatigue. I mean, it's a thing. People talk
Right.
about it, but it's a thing. And to those of you who spent 2 hours with us today learning about this, hats off to you. Thank you for your care and concern for people in the world. And those folks who will be watching the recording, thank you for being part of this. Kimberly and Freddy, I love you both. I respect you so much, and I'm so grateful to you. And Nishka is fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the both. Thank you to everyone.
Absolutely.